Welcome this evening to the first of our election themes events for the 2008 election. My name is Jonathan Earl. I'm Associate Director for Programming here at the Dole Institute, and I'm also a teacher in the History Department. Our election-themed events are all under a title that we're calling POTUS 44. Does everybody know what POTUS stands for? Okay, everyone knows that. President of the United States. I want to make sure that people knew that. It's an old Secret Service designation that's kind of morphed into a more popular phrase. Looking up to make sure I was right, I noticed that there's also something called FLOTUS. That's First Lady of the United States. You learn something every time you go on Wikipedia. Each of our programs this fall, and there's a list of them that I'll talk about on the back of your program, deals with what is already the longest, most expensive presidential campaign in American history. It also may end up being one of the most important and historic, although, as some of you know, I'm working on a book about the election of 1860, an election which precipitated a crisis of the Union and resulted in a bloody civil war. Hopefully this one won't end up like that. But think about it. No matter who wins, we will have the first African-American president or the first woman vice president. We could also have the oldest president ever elected to a first term. Truly all historic firsts. For tonight's program, some reminders. Please take a moment to turn off your cell phones and your pagers. After Director Bill Lacey concludes his questions with our guests, we will open the floor to questions and answers from you, the audience. Please, if you are called upon, after you raise your hand, one of our student workers will bring one of these handheld mics to you. Remember, ask one question. Please make it a question. In other words, no speeches. These are times of high dudgeon and high emotion. Please help us keep the Dole Institute the most civil place on Kansas, or maybe the planet, to talk about politics. That's our goal here. You may have noticed the pamphlet on your seat as you sat down this evening inviting you to become a friend of the Dole Institute. Giving levels begin as low as $15 for students, and I see a lot of students here, thank you, or veterans, and it gets you some excellent perks. Some reserved seating for our signature events, invitations to meet our guests of honor. And I wanted to make it clear that if you join the Friends of the Dole Institute at the $100 level by the 19th of this month, September, you will be invited to a private reception and program with the legendary Baltimore Sun journalist and TV personality Jack Germond, or Jacko Germondo, as John McLaughlin calls him. Please look at your program for a second to look at our upcoming programs. We have so many this semester. We're trying to kind of let you have a window into so many of our various facets of this election. We have the 15th, Professor Kevin Wilmot's talking about the top 10 political movies you must see. We have a Constitution Day program on the 17th. Bill Press from CNN's Crossfire will be here on the 1st. 1 month out, we will have Jerry Austin, a former fellow, back, and Whit Ayers, a legendary pollster. And we'll watch the final debate together here on the 15th with Professor Banwart directing a dial group. I also wanted to suggest, if you like what you hear tonight, each of these gentlemen has a weekly study group, not for credit, which you can visit. Mr. Joe Gaylord's study group, Recipes for Success, the Habits and Skills of a Winning Campaign, starts next Tuesday and runs every Tuesday in Simon's Media Room behind us from 4 to 5:30. Ray Strother's study group runs Wednesdays, 4 to 5:30, on political communications, the art of the science, or the science of the art. Bill Lacey and I were originally a little bit concerned we wouldn't be able to retain the types of fellows we wanted during this campaign season. It's so busy, so lucrative. Boy, are we pleased with ourselves and with the quality of the fellows we have on campus this semester. I think you'll agree with me after the conclusion of this program. On the far side of the stage, Joe Gaylord ranks among the nation's most experienced political consultants, and I mean that. The word experience has been thrown around so fast and loose during this campaign, I had to go back and look it up in the dictionary to make sure it meant what I thought it did. His specialties, strategic message development, media, campaign organization, and party coalition building, have had a significant impact not just on our politics, but on recent political history. Joe was for many years the top political advisor to a Georgia congressman named Newt Gingrich, and widely known as the architect of the GOP takeover of Congress back in 1994. This was the first time, speaking as a historian here, in 40 years that Republicans controlled the House, and the first time in 70 years they retained control 2 years later.
Joe Gaylord was executive director of the NRCC, the National Republican Congressional Committee, and the founder of the American Campaign Campaign Academy, which we've talked about a little bit tonight, which offered 12-week training courses in campaign management, fundraising, and communications. He lives with his wife, Molly, in Arlington, Virginia, and St. Michael's, Maryland. If you've never been, a beautiful Eastern Shore village on the scenic Miles River. Although since a former defense secretary and a current vice president built houses there, there might be a lot more security checkpoints and choppers. Not so much as quiet as it was. Ray Strother, in the middle here, is a truly legendary political consultant. In fact, some have credited him with inventing modern political consulting. He attended Northwestern Louisiana State in Natchitoches, Louisiana. Did I say that right?
Got it.
Before transferring to LSU and went on to earn a master's degree in journalism, he has consulted on a staggering 300-plus campaigns for candidates including Gary Hart, Al Gore, Mary Landrieu, Lloyd Bentsen, Russell Long, and an Arkansas governor named Bill Clinton. He is an author of some note. His novel Cottonwood is about, imagine this, a political consultant who loses his soul. And his memoir, Falling Up, How a Redneck Helped Invent Political Consulting, is an uncommonly good book. If you need further evidence this guy's a legend among the political class, think about this. The national award given to political professionals for service is nicknamed the Strother. No word on whether the statuette is fashioned in Ray's image. With no further ado, I give you Bill Lacey, director of the Dole Institute, who will interview these fascinating gentlemen for the next 45 minutes. Bill.
Thank you. Thanks, John. One thing I would mention, John said he was a professor of history and an associate director here. He was also a heck of a good interim director of the Dole Institute of Politics in my absence, so we need to remember that for John, too. I also want to recognize somebody that is absolutely vital to everything we do here, but especially in terms of civic engagement, our associate director, Barbara Ballard. Barbara, stand up real fast. And finally, we are blessed with an incredible team here, and that's why you get to see so many speakers done, hopefully in a way that you think is fairly professional. I have a wonderful group of folks, ranging from our student workers who help us to Lawrence Bush, who's the gentleman behind the curtain back in the offices, who's running all of the AV setup and everything tonight. And so when you see anyone from Maggie Mahoney, who greets you at the front door, to Linda K. Pritchard, who's been here before any of the rest of us, to any of our team, we would appreciate it if you would thank them for all of their hard work. And that includes Allison Carter, who is the crazy lady with a camera back here at the very back. Ray and Joe, welcome. I mean, my first question is this. There's a website that probably a lot of you are aware of called realclearpolitics.com. And one thing that they do is they just keep reams of polling data on it. And the thing that I really like about that website is they give you a current national average of the presidential polls. Now, in the current Real Clear Politics national polling average, Senator Obama is ahead. I started this totally wrong. And he led by 7% on this average before his European trip. Today, Senator McCain leads by 2%. My first question is, do these numbers reflect a structural and fundamental change in the election, or simply a natural post-convention settlement?
I don't think it represents a great change. This is a polarized country. We're red states, blue states, like it or not, and our elections are very close. Look at the last 3 or 4 presidential elections. They're very close elections. So it was expected. I think everyone expected this race to tighten up, and it has tightened up. So I'm not surprised by that at all.
Well, I'd just like to say that I hope that it's a permanent change. It's welcome. Move that down just a little bit. It was a little too close. I think that I'm a partisan Republican, as you know. I think Obama's had a bad stretch since Berlin, and I think that part of that. I mean, even though there was a great Democratic convention and it appeared that everybody came together, one of the things that is true in politics generally and in presidential campaigns particularly, that when you have a very hard-fought primary battle between two principles that goes down to the wire or very close to the wire, it is oftentimes debilitating to that party in the general election. And I think that as much as the Democrats did great work to try to put the party back together again, I think it's still weakened to a certain extent by particularly the bitterness of the last 3 or 4 weeks of the primary campaign. And I think McCain, having a good convention and having been energized by the party having been energized by the Palin choice, bounced us into the lead on these polls. But anything can happen in the next 8 weeks.
I don't think it's permanent. To finish part of the question I didn't answer, I don't think it's permanent for a couple of reasons. One is Ms. Palin, Governor Palin, has never met the meat grinder in Washington, D.C., the press. And she's unscathed at the moment. She's untouched. She won't be in 30 days. We'll know a lot more about her. And one of the reasons people said they would not vote for Obama early on, they said, I just don't know enough about him. Well, they're still saying that, but they don't seem to say that about her, but they don't know enough about her. I don't think it's permanent. I think that we have some debates coming up that are going to be very important. I think a slip or a slide or a misstatement will determine this race. I think it's going to be very, very close. I don't think it's going to hinge on the vice presidential election, whoever the vice president is. It never has before, and I don't think it will this time. But someone's going to make a mistake, and that the person who makes that mistake will not be elected.
Both of you have alluded to a little bit to the conventions, the VP choices. Talk a little bit about, did the conventions achieve their objectives for each party? And talk about the VP choices. And on the Democratic side, talk about the VP choice in the context of, would Senator Obama have been better off politically to pick Senator Clinton?
Well, let's take the Clinton thing first. I suspect he would have been better off had he picked Clinton. First of all, he wouldn't have the same Republican vice presidential candidate. It wouldn't have happened. So the conventions, though, the Democrats made a terrible error. They let the Republicans come up a couple of days after them and stepped on their convention. You always get a bump out of the conventions, and the Democrats would probably have gotten a great bump. Obama had the big stadium event and everything, and probably would have done well. But McCain announced his vice president immediately after. It was beautiful politics. It was, I have to compliment it. And he stepped on the story so badly that the Obama bounce didn't happen. The Republicans had their convention in the clear, and the Republican bounce did happen. But even the bounce, remember, the bounce isn't permanent. I hearken back to the Dukakis bounce. Dukakis was about 17 points ahead when he came out of the Democratic convention, and he lost miserably. So the bounce is a temporary bounce. It's like a trampoline with a second jump.
Well, and that's true. I mean, if you just go back historically, coming out of the Kansas City convention in 1976, Jerry Ford was behind Jimmy Carter by something like 32 points, I believe, in August. And that came down to 6,000 votes in Ohio, I think, ultimately, and maybe a couple thousand in Hawaii when the presidential race was actually decided. I think that we had, this is just my observation. I've been going to Republican conventions since 1968, and it was a weird convention. It was weird in the sense we had the interruption of the hurricane for kind of screwing up the first night for what it is that you would do and what it is you'd say. Having been at other Republican conventions when there were Republican presidents, not having any presence of a Republican president seemed weird to me also, just from my own perspective, although it might have been great politically. It was strange. I think it was a little bit difficult to get into any kind of rhythm for the convention on the 3-day schedule when you scrap the first day of the programming. As one of the phenomenon about the Palin speech was the only thing that was happening. It was what was built up by the media. It was the only thing that they were talking about. Can she meet the test? Can she pass the test? Will she fall over the podium? Will she chew gum? What's going to go happen to poor Sarah? Can she do this? And she just knocked it out of the park with this speech. And it just electrified the convention, and it electrified Republicans because they got excited about something, and it captured the imagination of the 40 million or 37 million people who watched the speech. So in that sense, and then McCain gave his speech on Thursday night. It was a fine speech. It was his own. I suspect that it was the first time that most Americans had heard his own compelling story in his own words of what it was like to be a prisoner for 5.5 years. And that certainly added to his both credibility and trustworthiness, I think. So in that regard, the convention turned out to be successful, but it was just strange to watch it and see it kind of unfold.
One of the things that I was really watching that speech for, and I'm curious what both of you think about this, was whether or not he would distance himself from the president and how aggressively he would do that. Do you guys think he did that well and he did that enough?
Well, he had to be very careful. There are a lot of party faith. Well, 30% of America still think Bush is a good president. So he didn't want to offend that 30 because they're all his people. No question about that. But how many times did he mention Bush in his speech? Did he mention him at all?
I think once.
Once? Once or zero. I couldn't remember.
He might have said the incumbent president.
He may have. But he was, one thing you're not going to hear from their campaign is much about George Bush.
But your campaign is doing that for us.
Yeah. And from the Obama campaign, you will hear a great deal about George Bush. But the speeches, I thought the speech was fine.
Okay. There's one name in all this that's missing, and I find it interesting because he was here at the Dole Institute about 3 years ago, and that's Senator Joe Biden. I thought that was an outstanding choice, and I still think it was a very logical choice for where Senator Obama was at the time. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think if he would have chosen Hillary Clinton, there wouldn't be no question about this election at all. But it only strikes me that you had. I think the choices for vice president in both parties weakened their major arguments going into the election, where you had Obama being totally about change, choosing a senator who had been in Washington for 32 years to buck up his credentials on foreign policy, and where you had McCain running his campaign almost totally on the experience factor. You had, and then chose Palin, and the thing that came out of the box right away was this is a woman who, how could she possibly be vice president? Was which the media said, and so you had the undermining of the arguments that both sides were making. So it was kind of like there are tickets with mixed metaphors on them now. I don't know.
Okay. Thomas Friedman wrote something interesting today that I wanted to ask you guys what you thought about. He wrote that at the start of this campaign, Senator Obama connected with people like no leader since President Reagan. But now he suggests, and his exact words are cool to cold. The senator has gone from cool to cold and needs to offer more specifics to reclaim the mantle of change. Do you think he's right?
I agree completely. I think there has been a cooling off. There has been a loss of enthusiasm, particularly among the new base he's trying to create. He has to heat it back up. Now, it could be a matter of timing, like an entertainer knows when to have the crescendo in his performance. And I think they intentionally had a lull during the convention, during the Republican convention, and I thought they intended to do that, just what they did, to give the Republicans their chance. Then I think they probably will be coming back with a new campaign. I'm fairly convinced of that, because if they intended to continue what they're doing right now, they would surely lose.
The most interesting thing, this was a poll that was taken, I think, before both conventions, that I just found fascinating. And it might have had to do with the length of the campaign so far, which is, as Jonathan said, this is the longest campaign in presidential campaign in history. And for those who have to sit through it, it's even longer. But what was said was, do you think you want to know more about Obama? And I think 74% of the people said, no, I don't want to know anymore. I've heard enough. And the same question was asked about McCain, and about only 44% said that they'd heard enough or wanted to hear more information about it. And I think that speaks to a little bit about what Friedman was talking about and what you've mentioned here also, is that the message has either gotten kind of off course just a bit, or it's gotten a bit stale because it's been so highly publicized after every primary win when there was a big Obama speech. And so then the question becomes, how new, how vibrant is it, or have I heard it all before? And it sounds a little rote at this point. And so I think an influx of new stuff would be good.
Well, Obama tends to intellectualize things, and he's pretty firmly in control of that campaign, as beautiful as it is. But he's got to stop intellectualizing and start inspiring again. I remember the statement where the woman, and we all know this old political story, the woman comes and says, Governor Stevenson, everybody's going to vote for you. All thinking people are for you. He said, but madam, I need a majority.
One of the things that has absolutely blown me away, and most of you know I've been on a few presidential campaigns, is the efficiency and the messaging and the technology, at least up to literally the last week to 10 days of Senator Obama's campaign. Can both of you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. It hasn't gone away. Technology's still there. They've built the most massive list of names that I can imagine in my political career. They have introduced a brand new medium for politics, the text message. They have tens of millions of names. They'll start getting calls before Election Day, on Election Day, 3 times during Election Day to ask people if they have voted yet. And the people who have the text messages, machines, devices, are what he has to turn out, the youth vote. He has to turn out the youth vote, huge youth vote. He has to turn out a huge black vote. He has to turn out more than representative Hispanic vote to win. And their technology hasn't gone away. It's like somehow it's like an engine that's idling and they're waiting to step on the accelerator, because it is massive and very impressive. I've never been so impressed by anything. And I'm always the message guy who's more into emotion than technology. But they've impressed me.
You can't help but be impressed by it. I was so interested in it that I signed up. So I get all the Obama emails and the way that that they can do things. I'm sure many of you are on the list and have done this also. But on the weekend before each primary, you could sign up and get the list of voters that nobody else was going to get in the primary state. And your responsibility was to call them and call them on your cell phone to motivate them to turn out and vote. And that nobody would get duplicate names. That if you signed up for the name, they would hound you to talk to those people until you'd actually done it or said that you'd done it. It is a remarkable bit of providing basic organizational strategy and harnessing it to the internet technology that is available right now, and it's a wonderful thing to see. But the other part of that is that you can't also get away from these other groups that have started. I think I was told today in a conversation that I was having about technology that the Obama campaign has more than 1,000 affinity groups that have thousands of members around the country that would be everything from hairdressers for to students for to my Facebook group for that are part of this campaign effort. And I'll tell you that we are on the Republican side so far behind that it's not even funny.
Ray, you mentioned young voters. One of our missions here that I think everybody's aware of is we really focus on getting everyone, but especially young people, more involved in politics. And Dr. Ballard will be coordinating along with a group of student advisors. Is it 2.5 weeks, Barbara, that our civic engagement week this year is expanded to 2.5 weeks because it's such an important undertaking and all. And I would encourage any students or members of the community who are interested in learning more to talk directly to her about it. But we always hear that this is going to be the year when young people really kind of change the turnout model. It appears to me that this is really the best chance we've had since, I would say, probably 1980 or 1984. What do you guys think?
I think there's no question about it. If you look at the results in Democratic primaries and caucus states about who got involved and how that was different from other years, and one of the things that you saw was that in the early going, and particularly in the caucus states, you had young people and students just knocking it out of the ballpark for Obama. I mean, for example, if you look at Missouri, where Obama won the primary, he only carried 4 counties in the state. He carried Jackson County, he carried St. Louis County, he carried Jefferson City, and he carried Columbia. And the rest of the state was won by Clinton in the primary. That's a direct result of turnout efforts that you were talking about among black voters and among students. I would say as a practitioner that younger voters' participation has been unreliable in general elections so far. But there is every evidence that there's a much higher degree of interest this year, and you have to have that kind of interest before you're going to drive the vote. There's no question about that.
I hate to be a skeptic. I think this year the youth vote will probably turn out better. But I've been hearing this. I've been doing this since 1967. I've heard this in every election since 1967. There was going to be a massive youth vote. And thus far, I've seen some incremental changes, but I've never seen a massive change in the youth vote. This may be the year because of the convergence of technology and a lot of other things, particularly technology. This may be the year it happens, and I certainly hope so. I've spent the last part of my career trying to encourage people, younger people, to get involved in the process. So this may be the time.
Let's go to a very difficult question, but it's an important question, I think. Talk to us a little bit about how important both of you feel race and gender are in this campaign.
I'll be happy to tackle that because it's something that I care a lot about. I think the difference in this race is race. If Obama were white, he would have a 20-point lead. There is not a reason that a Democratic candidate for president is tied when you have a very unpopular president, you have a sinking economy, you have a war that goes on and on without really reason that people can understand, and we're tied, it's almost impossible. What you have is, in my opinion, is ingrained racism. This could be a whole discussion by itself, and we could go on for several hours about this one. But I picked this up in the primaries because a lot of people are talking about the blue-collar vote that was for Hillary Clinton. That was blue-collar vote that was voting against Barack Obama. Because if you work for a living, hourly wage, and you have a high school education, and I don't want to generalize too much, but you would tend more to be prejudiced than you would be if you had a college degree. or if you had a white-collar job. I talked to someone in the Clinton campaign, for example, in a state, and she said Clinton had won that particular state strictly because of race, and they knew it. Not that they did it. They didn't provoke it. They did not have to. One was a white woman, one was a black man. I think race is the whole factor, and that's why he has to have an enhanced youth vote, an enhanced black vote, an enhanced Hispanic vote to overcome the prejudice we're going to find. All of you remember, maybe you don't, Doug Wilder was way ahead in Virginia and was elected, but barely. And you remember Harvey Gantt in North Carolina was running way ahead of Jesse Helms until Election Day and lost by a huge number of votes. And I've seen it time and time again, where if a black candidate doesn't have about a 10-point lead going into the final day, he loses. The reason is you can't poll racial prejudice. All of you, anyone, not you, this is a different kind of group, but if one is called on the telephone, one never admits prejudice to a stranger on a telephone. It's impossible. So racism never shows up in a poll. So how do you find it? How do you know it's there? You can, anecdotal, you can find it all over the place. Every day I do. I find it talking to Southerners and talking to people. And racism is the big factor in this campaign. I think it's the number one factor in this campaign. Not the economy, not anything else, not the war, race.
I think that gender has also played a role. I think there's no question that it played a role in Hillary's campaign and what she was able to achieve. She also became a much better candidate by the end of the race than she was at the beginning of the race. I think one of the things that Governor Palin does for the Republican ticket is it changes the party dramatically because we don't have two old white men running. The second thing that it does is that she has become every mother's governor and is a person who has not only extraordinary family responsibilities, but has taken on extraordinary state responsibilities and has been moderately successful at having done both. And so people that I see and talk to who might be of a much more liberal persuasion than the conservative base of the Republican Party, but are still Republicans, are rejuvenated by her nomination because they feel good about it because she's a woman. And this is not much different than my wife, who, as Bill knows, used to work for Bill and was a Republican precinct committee woman for years, who said to me after I did Speaker Gingrich, she said, I'm really proud as a woman that Nancy Pelosi is Speaker of the House. And I think there is a bit of the gender thing that is at work in this historic campaign as well.
And let me follow up on both of those and ask a question. And Ray, the first is for you. And this is because you said something there that I thought was striking. You were talking about Senator Clinton's voters who are voting against Senator Obama in the Democratic primary. Did I understand correctly? Because he is black. You're talking about Democrats.
Absolutely. Remember, the bastion of segregation in this country wasn't here. It was in the South. All of our senators and House members were Democratic. It was called the Solid South. And they became the unsolid South when the civil rights legislation was passed. And they were so against the civil rights legislation and the party they identified with it, which was Lyndon Johnson, the Democratic Party, they became Republicans. And they've never come back. They're still, so race was the great divider, but those were Democrats. And later, you can call them Reagan Democrats or whatever you want. But the problem is not Republicans necessarily. It's racist. I mean, it's nonpartisan. And I think that, as I described, the person I consider more likely to be a racist would be somebody in Pennsylvania or Alabama or wherever, who works for minimum wage or an hourly wage, even $20, $30 an hour, whatever it is, belongs to a union. That's fine. And has to compete for work with other people, with minority groups, with Hispanics and blacks. they will tend to vote Republican.
Okay. The other question I wanted to follow up on is this. We saw what happened to Senator Clinton during the primary season. We're seeing what's happening to Governor Palin in the general election season vis-a-vis the media. Is there a double standard there?
Well, we think there's always a double standard with the media.
Well, I think there is, too. I think she's getting much too good a treatment.
Whoa!
And I'm ashamed of the press corps at the moment, but I think they'll make up for it later.
I have no doubt they will.
We're going to get to your questions in just a couple more minutes, but I have about 3 or 4 more quick questions. Talk just a little bit about money. You know, will Senator Obama have an advantage because he's opted out of the federal funding? Is that going to benefit him in the long run?
Yes.
One at a time, please.
Well, probably it could. But one of the things that has happened to Senator Obama's campaign is, and this is in degrees and in shades, but the money machine has turned off just a little bit, and he now has to be and participate in fundraising events where the money is, and the money is in states that he's going to carry. The money's in California, the money's in New York, the money's in New Jersey, the money's in Connecticut, and that's where he's going. And he's not going to be getting any more votes there. So that is an expenditure. If you believe that the most precious resource in a campaign is the candidate's time because they're the most valuable resource in the campaign, using it up in fundraising events in September and October is a very expensive use of time. On the other hand, McCain doesn't have to do any fundraising for himself. He may have to appear at some Republican Party fundraising events for the Republican National Committee, but also the National Committee has the entire Bush family to raise money with. I mean, to move around as celebrities during the course of the campaign. So in that regard, it might be a disadvantage. And the question is, with the race tightening up the way that it has appeared to, it doesn't look like the money having an extra effort in broadening the board of states, including Virginia and North Carolina and Montana and South Dakota and North Dakota, and that would really put those states back into play in the presidential race.
But the Obama raised an immense amount of money, and he invested it beautifully in organization in all these states. That infrastructure is there. It may need to be fine-tuned. The volume may need to be turned up just a little, but it is there. It wasn't wasted money. It's there, and it can spring into action. So he has used his money well. You can say the money he spent on television maybe you're not getting any benefit from now, but the money he spent on organization was money in the bank. And it would be hard for anyone to raise enough money to duplicate his efforts right now.
I agree with that.
Okay. From a strategic point of view, and let's just do this one candidate at a time, gentlemen. From a strategic point of view, what does Senator McCain need to do to be elected president?
Stay healthy. Not get a cold or the flu. First thing. He's got to
use his mother everywhere.
And take his mother everywhere, who's so old and such good health. Avoid Bush at all costs. Try to prove that the war is going to wind down, and somehow find an economic message that people can believe in.
Joe?
I think that he has to point out the danger that there will be no change in Washington with one party controlling all parts of the federal government. And that, in fact, if you want real change, the only way that you can get that is to force Republicans and Democrats to work with one another, and so you need a Republican president for that.
But this election isn't about McCain. It's about Obama. This election is not about McCain. It's about Obama. It's about Obama being black. It's about Obama being new. It's nothing about, I don't think it has to do with McCain.
Which leads me to the next question, which I know because we've talked about it, we all agree on. What does Senator Obama have to do to be elected president?
He has to redouble his efforts and regen the enthusiasm he had before. And he can almost do that surreptitiously, undercover. But besides that, he has to make himself believable on some issues, and he has to strike some cards on one or two issues and carry them through. Right now, he's skipping around. He was on education today. He was on the economy yesterday. He's going to have to find a common campaign theme and just run at it, and prove what he has to prove himself still. He has to prove himself. So he has to find some way that he can instill confidence in people, because I think that's really what the election's about.
I think that's right. It's interesting. We could very well be into a rematch, kind of, not a rematch, but a rerun of the campaign, much like 1980, where you had great unrest in the country, great unhappiness with the direction of the country, great concern about the economy, great concern internationally with what's going on. And there was a real question whether or not Ronald Reagan was qualified to be president and to be trusted to be president. And that decision was really not reached, I don't think, by the American people until late October. Maybe starting around the 17th, 18th of October, and then it was one of those things that just continued to build. We may see that come to Senator Obama this year, following the last debate on the 15th of October, where people are going to decide, as you say, this campaign is all about him. They're either going to decide, yeah, I believe I can buy into that, and I will, and I'm for him, and we're going to go. Or they'll say, not this time, not yet, and it's hard to know at this point what that answer is actually going to be. It strikes me that the Obama campaign will continue to try to tie McCain to Bush, although I don't know that that's totally believable, that anybody really thinks that McCain is, Bush the third. But I think there also is going to have to be, he's going to have to demonstrate a higher degree of competence and kind of gut reaching, as Friedman said in his story today, of reaching people in their guts to say, you got to do this because it's for your future. And I think that part of the message is kind of worn away a little bit.
Okay. And the debates, ultimately, and people making their final judgment in terms of who they're going to vote for, the debates could potentially have a huge impact either way for Senator Obama, right?
Yes.
Okay. I think that's right. And my guess is, that if you just think about the expectation game, because he's so articulate and has done so well, the expectation for Obama is going to be very high. The expectation for both McCain and Palin is not going to be very high. So anything they do might come out as a victory.
Okay.
But you don't know that.
Wonderful. I could ask questions of these two gentlemen all evening, but we've come to a point that I think all of you enjoy, which is your opportunity to pose questions. Remember Dr. Earle's request. One question, raise your hand if you would like to ask a question. Wait for the student with the remote mic to bring it by. Please stand if you can and ask your question, and no filibustering. We have a question right here, Julia.
Do you think we're really going to get the campaigns focusing on the issues rather than pigs and lipstick?
No.
Next question. How about we both hope so, and we're not too optimistic, but we could be. But part of this is I just would say pigs and lipstick, stupid. But you say focus on the issues. The choice for president by Americans is an intensely personal choice. They think that they know these people because they're in their living rooms every night or on their computers every day, one way or the other. And they make a judgment about that that oftentimes doesn't have anything to do with policies. It doesn't have anything to do with issues. They may look for the issues that enforce what it is they already believe, because we're kind of a divided nation in terms of where we get our information from. So if it reinforces something that they're looking for, it might. But they look at, I don't want to over-dramatize this, but they look at personality factors a lot when it comes to particularly their choice for president.
Okay. We'll go back and forth, side to side. So Alex?
My question is sort of in the same vein of pigs and lipstick. Mostly it's about attacks. I've heard some pretty clever attacks. Some of them are just outright lies, like Barack Obama's a Muslim, which if you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you in Alaska. And I'm just curious, why are Republicans so good at these attacks and Democrats so bad at them? And maybe...
We have to work harder because the news media is against us.
Oh, I'm sure they are. Maybe Ray can tell us why the Republicans are so good, and Joe could tell us why the Democrats are so bad.
I don't know why we're so bad at it. I really don't. We've never been good at responding to the negative attacks or exposing the lie, although Republicans say the press is with us. If there's so much untruth out there and the press is with us, why don't they expose it? I mean, they don't do that. If the press was in our corner completely, they would help us out. They don't help us out. I was at a dinner party in Bozeman. This lady was railing about Bill Clinton. Oh, what a terrible man, and all these sexual exploits, and the damn newspapers. You can't trust anything they say, and so I don't read them at all. I said, lady, where did you get your information about Bill Clinton? I got it from the... one afternoon, I loved to listen to Rush Limbaugh. Rather than beat myself up with a whip. And so I'm listening to Rush, which I do almost every day. And he said, the New York Times is an arm of the Democratic Party. He said, where have you read about Whitewater in the New York Times? No, not in the New York Times. Whitewater doesn't exist. It was during the Clinton investigation. Whitewater... New York Times broke the story on Whitewater. It was their story. But all these Limbaugh people are listening. Right. They're not on our side. My religion's journalism. And I think that without journalism, we can't have democracy. And if we weaken journalism, if we decide we have to win elections by attacking the institution that keeps us free, we're in more trouble than I can possibly imagine.
I actually think that the advertising in a presidential campaign plays less role than any other form of communication.
Absolutely.
I mean, what people... The only time that it actually works is when it reinforces something that people are already seeing, thinking, or believing. It has a much less role. The question of whether I'll take seriously the question of whether we're really good or not at exploiting weaknesses on the other side or going for the jugular in campaigns. I think we do that a lot. I think it's a defense mechanism that turns into offense in the campaign world. You look for what the biggest asset is and think, how can you bring that down? And a lot of times you can do it through ridicule and sarcasm, and I think that sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it backfires. But it usually always starts when you're behind. And the fact of the matter is that most times, in most campaigns, for most offices, Republicans are behind until October. And it's just that's just the way the cycle kind of works. and to get yourself back into the game sometimes. I mean, part of the way that you do that is to bring down the other guy.
Joe, you have somebody on this side? This gentleman right here? Then we'll go back to Alex.
In McCain's effort to establish himself as being able to bring about change and shake up Washington, he has had to, and he is really alienating quite a chunk of his Republican base. And if he does get elected, it's going to be difficult for him to get much support from the Democrats in Congress. And if he alienates a pretty big chunk of his Republican base, how in the world does he ever expect that he's going to have enough support from Congress to get anything done if he does get elected? And if this is the case, is this something that Obama should try to incorporate into his campaign, or does he just hope that we all get this on our own?
No, that's too hard for the public to understand. I worked for a governor one time, and I told him, man, run for governor. I said, if you do this, how are you ever going to govern? He said, let me get elected and I'll worry about that. And that's sort of what you know. If we start talking about, well, the Republicans won't like him, the Democrats won't like him, I think it would just go over people's heads.
And one of the things that we see right now, at least in the polling data that I've looked at lately, is that you have that each candidate, Obama and McCain, are getting identical shares of their party's vote right now, and probably almost identical shares in enthusiasm for it. That changed dramatically with our convention for McCain from where it was. My experience, I've spent 30 years of my life working for congressional elections. My experience is that the people who get elected pay a lot of attention to the leader who gets elected and how much they get elected by. And so it might be that it very well might be that McCain, who has kicked people about campaign finance or kicked people about carbon trading or kicked people over other sets of issues like immigration, that might find wildly popular some of the reforms that he would like to make. I kind of discount that. I think that he would have an inability to govern because of the people who don't, for Democrats who won't work with him and Republicans who hate him. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Let me ask both of you a quick follow-up. Have either of you seen any empirical evidence post the selection of Governor Palin that the Republican base is not excited and enthusiastic and energetic about the McCain-Palin ticket?
None whatsoever.
Not I. No.
In fact, it's the enthusiasm on our side has increased 100% from where it was. I mean, it went from I believe about, are you excited and enthusiastic about this election for the Republicans? And you'd get, yeah, I'm really excited about 15%. I'm kind of excited about 15%. That's now moved into the 62 and 64% range for a degree of excitement, which means a lot for being able to motivate volunteers and the troops that actually do the work in elections. The best thing that can happen in an election campaign is when you have your neighbor or a friend talk to you and say, I've been watching this McCain-Palin ticket, and I think they really could change Washington. What do you think? That's the single best thing that you want to have happen in campaigns. They go on at 4 different levels. I mean, there's the campaigns that the parties run, there's the campaign that the interest groups run, there's the campaign that the media reports about, and there's the campaign that neighbors talk to one another about.
Which is the most valuable of all.
That's the most valuable.
Alex, you got a question right there?
Yeah, there's another one here, and that is the campaign carried out by who knows who in the emails. Somebody mentioned the Muslim thing, but there's much, much more than that, and very, very negative. It implicates race very much, gender sometimes too, and it's below the radar usually for the press, I think. Now, how do the campaigns respond to that kind of negativity? What can they do about it?
Well, Obama was stung particularly by that Muslim charge, and I've seen them react to it several times. If you tried to react to every charge on the internet, that's all you would do. You wouldn't run a campaign. You'd spend all of your time, because there are literally tens of millions of those things floating around. I'm sure you get 1,000 a day. I do. You know, somebody referring something, sending me some blog or something. And you have to decide where you spend your resources and your time. And there are always crazies on both sides. There are crazies on our side. Like I saw people circulating a picture of the new vice presidential nominee in a slinky, sexy outfit leaning against a bar with a glass of wine. Well, the problem they had was the head was just a little bit too large. It superimposed a face on it. And so his friend sent it to me and said, wouldn't this be a great thing to circulate? I said, if it were true. And I said, but there's that sort of thing all over the place. And you just have to ignore it.
And one of the things that does happen, I think, that while the internet is much more active and there are lots of these things that are going on, as it has become bigger and you get more and more, these emails that you get mean less and less. I mean, the number that you go through and just delete and get rid of and don't even open because of the danger of what it is that. What really happens is that people try to be outrageous and outrageous enough so that they force the news media to actually cover it and to write about it, so it gets into the public discourse. The Obama campaign, I think, effectively started another one of their own websites that was Stop the Smear or something along those lines, Set the Record Straight or whatever it is. The campaigns have to do that, but you kind of think about it in terms of equal and opposite. Is it real? Is it deep? Is it hurting? Is there something we have to do about it, or is this total fringe? And those are judgments that are made in each campaign.
Let me make one more point about that too, because as good citizens, when we get something that we know to be wrong, we should send evidence of that back. And you can go, is it Snopes.com, guys? Who's familiar with that? Snopes.com and other places you can go online where you can check out a lot of these urban legends and find the evidence that they're simply untrue. And I've done that in a number of cases. We need to get some student questions. So if you're a student and wants to, and thank you, right on cue.
I was just wondering, you talk a lot about race and gender in the election. Do you think age on either side will affect voter turnout or the way people vote for their party or not?
Yes, I do.
I do too.
Age is a problem for McCain, except in the most dependable of all voter, which is the older voter. But it is a problem. That's why he has to show vitality all the time and stay in motion all the time, and why he wanted a younger vice president and all of that. But ageism is definitely, because I'm in that category, is definitely a prejudice.
I think even though it could be that seniors they're the most reliable voters, I think it is a double-edged sword with McCain. And that is when you have a lot of 72 and 73 and 74 and 75-year-olds who say, I'm not quite as sharp as I used to be. I don't know if
That's true, too.
If I can, do I want that to be President of the United States when something happens? I say that, but I'm just in my 60s,
Some of us are just in our 50s, Joe. Question over here. Gotti?
When in the fall do you think the polls begin to affect the voters' thinking at all?
I don't think they do.
I don't think they do. I don't think people...
I think there's so many polls that people just take them with a grain of salt at this point.
Most people
Who
don't
are these
believe
people?
it.
Who's getting called? I don't believe it.
People don't believe it.
And candidates are just putting it out to try to persuade me. I don't think so.
But a question I should have asked you guys earlier. A lot of the young voters that we think may be participating in the election this year don't have landlines at all. They just have cell phones. And if I'm correct, pollsters typically don't call cell phone numbers. Could that be warping the numbers that we're seeing right now?
I think so. I think that my pollster friends tell me it's more and more difficult to reach people on the telephone for several reasons. Caller ID, cell phones. So they're not calling cell phones, and if you have a large number of younger people who don't have landlines and you're not calling them, they're not going to be represented correctly in the polls, I think. You know, I don't have any data that would prove that. But that's my opinion. You agree with that, Jeff?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, samples are now usually drawn from voter registration lists.
Right.
And if phone numbers have been appended to the voter registration list, then the person is going to get called. Or there was a time, I get confused about this, there was a time when they would do random digit dial selection, where you could then hit a cell phone.
Democrats still do mostly that.
Is that right? So they could be included. But the thing that I find about the whole polling bit is, I mean, you know, you can't swing a dead cat and not hit a poll. You know, it's done by one organization or another. I've subjected myself to answering the questions sometimes, and I think that the polling. I mean, if you read through either like a Gallup poll or the NBC Wall Street Journal poll or the ABC Washington Post poll, those questions are so long that by the time, maybe it's just my 63 years, I'm going, what was my choice of A? And you just kind of go, get over it, I don't care, just get off the phone.
But remember the polls. If you look at realclearpolitics.com, all the polls are very similar. In other words, they're not way off. They're 1 or 2 points apart, which would point to the accuracy of the polling, in my opinion.
If this election is going to be decided by the candidate who slips up, what does that say about the American people?
They don't like slippers.
No, I don't know. It's if we knew exactly why people vote, we'd make a lot more money. We have to guess a lot. But if people are looking for proof, let's say, remember, we're not talking about a lot of people here that are undecided in America. We have the right wing. They would vote for McCain probably if he were mummified and pushed around in a convertible. Then we have the left wing that would vote for anybody.
With the hammer and sickle?
The hammer and sickle. So take those people out. They're about 20% on either side, something like that. And then you take out the fairly dependable Republicans and the fairly dependable Democrats, take those out. And then you have a very small group of votes we're both looking at. Very, very small group of votes. And how they make their decisions is what this whole election's about. It's not about those dependable people. People talking about the base. Well, that's good for voter turnout, but it doesn't have that much to do with final tally on election day, in my opinion.
This side. Please let him bring you the mic, please.
It sounds as though issues have very little to do with what we vote for. It's personality, whether or not I like the guy.
That's a lot of it.
That's a lot of it, but it's also enhanced. Whether you like the guy or not, sometimes has, or the woman, sometimes has a lot to do with whether or not they agree with you on positions that they've taken. But you also have so there's the positioning question where they are on the values, attitudes, and opinions close to yours, and do you like them? Sometimes what happens though is that you have people who decide, yeah, I kind of agree with them on a lot of this stuff, but I just don't like them. And my point was that in presidential campaigns particularly, that could be true because they see so much of the candidates in their living rooms and on their computer screens, that they develop, a visceral feeling about whether they like or dislike them.
And it's pretty accurate. It's pretty accurate. A pollster told me one time, it's been 10 or 15 years ago, that he thought polling, that issues were just an excuse people used to vote for who they were going to vote for anyway. But they needed a reason. So they said, well, it's position on education. So we did an experiment one time in Georgia. Oh, I like his position on education. What is it?
That would be Georgia. No. Certainly wouldn't happen in Kansas.
No.
Any questions back over here? There's one back near the back. We have plenty of time left, so don't anybody panic out. We can ask a lot more questions.
With each election being decided by the Electoral College and the states being such an important part of this, and the popular vote not being really a contributing factor in what happens in the election, why do you think Washington has been so reluctant to try and change that, and why do you think voters are so ambivalent to this system that obviously that fails us?
Go ahead, Joe.
Because small states still want to be important. We have an electoral college, and if they're small and they're close, they must be campaigned to in their states. And that they don't want to be swamped by the eastern seaboard and the west coast.
I was in China a few years ago, right after the contested election that was decided by the Supreme Court. And I was lecturing Chinese students on how democracy works. and I made this stupid statement. The person who gets the most votes wins. Always? And I said, no, but I don't want to get into it. I'd like to see the thing abolished, but the problem is we need 2 elections in a row, that one Democratic and one Republican in a row, that where somebody, a minority candidate gets elected, then it'll change, believe me. I think the parties want it to protect themselves because they think they may need it. Now, what if Obama wins this time by the electoral vote but not the popular vote? I suspect the system will change.
Let me also remind everyone that, is it a week from tonight, everybody, that we have the program on Constitution Day? It's on the back of your program. We're going to talk about the Electoral College, so if you want to really get into depth on it, that would be a great time. Do we have questions over here? Okay, go ahead, Alex.
Hello. A year ago, immigration was the #1 issue on the table, but now it's all but virtually disappeared within the campaigns. And granted, it does completely divide parties on both sides. So, do you think that immigration is going to come back up to the front as an issue to kind of either divide the Hispanic vote or to kind of court it to one side or the other?
I don't think it's going to be an issue in this campaign, or much of an issue. One thing, Obama doesn't want to bring it up because of various reasons. But even McCain doesn't want the issue brought up. I mean, he was on the wrong side of his own party on that. So he's not going to bring it up. And I can't see any great advantage to Obama bringing it up except in Hispanic media, where he might use it. Remember, we can target things, and he may target media to the Hispanic vote on immigration, but I'm not sure. But that's the only way I would do it personally.
I can't imagine that, given the concern about the economy, education, healthcare, and the war, that it'll rise to the surface. I don't think McCain wants it to rise to the surface, and if Obama doesn't want it to rise, that means nobody's going to talk about it.
Would either of you care to speak to the impact of the spouses in this election?
Sure. You want to go first? You want me to?
Go.
Contrarian again. I don't think it matters. I don't think anyone's ever been elected or defeated because of a spouse. If so, Franklin Roosevelt wouldn't have been president. Eleanor was, if you read history, I'm not that old. If you read history, you'll find that she was very much disliked by the majority of the people in America, but didn't stop Franklin Roosevelt. If you remember, people didn't like Hillary Clinton at all in the early stage of the Clinton presidency. Yet she was a viable candidate for president. So I don't think the first ladies. I think both candidates have admirable first ladies. I think either one of them would be a great symbol for America.
I think they play an integral role in the campaign and the portraits that the candidates are trying to paint about themselves and their families. It gets back to my likability question, and that they seem compatible and want to be together, and that's we all love that, and it looks good, but I don't think it has any impact on the election.
Have any more questions on this side? Right here.
Kind of a follow-up to what she was asking, being a minority myself, how does Obama get the African-American, Latino, Hispanic vote to maybe offset some independent votes or some of the blue-collar voters that will vote for a Republican in this election?
He's working on it very hard. And the way you do that is through organization, and this man's an expert at it, more than I, because I'm a television, radio, media guy. And I probably don't know nearly as much about it. I do not know nearly as much about it as Joe does. But Obama has that apparatus in play right now in the black community, in the Hispanic community, and they're working it very hard. That's something you don't see on the surface, but is there fermenting.
Well, I mean, there are lots of ways for candidates to work the minority community pretty hard. A lot of it can come from the media and targeted media and both black radio and newspaper, black churches, as well as comes from the Hispanic television like Telemundo and part of making that work. The reason it never works for Republicans is because we show up on 2 weeks before the election and say, you ought to vote for us too, because we're going to be good. I mean, if you're not there, if you don't live it, if you don't feel it, if you're not a part of the everyday life that goes on in a minority community, you're probably not going to get elected there. And part of the challenge that Obama has I think been, there's so, at least I can see, there's so much African American pride in his nomination that it is very motivating for the community. But but that doesn't mean that you don't have to work it and work it hard organizationally in terms of trying to get people to the polls and get them out to vote. And there are lots of ways of doing that. The same is true in the Hispanic community. It has everything to do with who you're trying to reach and what way you're trying to reach them, what language you use in your commercials, what language you use in the materials that you get to the door, what kind of affinity you try to show for them. And, I mean, there's been some historic antipathy between the Hispanic community and the black community, and so Obama's challenge here, although we seem to have made it pretty easy because of the immigration stuff, but his challenge here is to rack up huge majorities with huge turnout in those communities. So he's got to double down in those two places, and the question is whether or not that can actually happen. It takes lots of money, lots of work, and lots of people.
I've seen it happen, though. When Edwin Edwards in Louisiana was running against David Duke, the Ku Klux Klan, there was a 90% black turnout in New Orleans. 90%. It's never been that way before, and will never be that way again, perhaps, unless you get another Klansman running. But it didn't require a lot of encouragement for them to vote, because they had self-interest, they wanted to prove a point. So it can happen.
I'm going to take two more questions, first on this side, second on this side. Get right here. Oh, I'm sorry, sir, you've already had one, so I'm going to get you. No, wait for the microphone, please, ma'am.
I just wanted to ask about the Supreme Court, and whoever gets elected might have to appoint two people might leave the Supreme Court, and they might have to appoint two people on the Supreme Court, and it would really impinge on what would happen whether it was a Democrat or a Republican, because if Republicans put two people on, then they could vote against Roe versus Wade or anything like that. So that's a big, that should be in play also, I would think. I don't know.
Well, on our side, you almost, what happens with the court is a matter of intense concern among very conservative voters. And the litany of things that John McCain says is he's going to appoint strict constructionist judges who don't make law from the bench, and he'd do it with like Roberts and Alito. It leaves it at that. I don't think, except I guess I don't know this because I don't know the issues well enough. I'm not certain that Supreme Court nominations and confirmations actually move voters because they don't think in those terms, or they don't connect them. They don't connect it that way. But
there's an undercurrent of discussion about that on the left, and some special groups are very concerned about it, and it's the mainstay of their argument against McCain. For example, the pro-choice people are very big they're really worried about who will be the next Supreme Court nominees. And there are a few other smaller groups on the Democratic side that are worried about it. So it is an issue, and it's an undercurrent issue that some people will vote strictly on that issue. For example, the choice people, that's probably their number one issue, if they're really choice people.
And they will be doing that in independent expenditures and other ways, and internet ways, and internet communication. I think you'll probably see that kind of commercial. But I don't think that it is a widespread umbrella kind of issue in a presidential campaign.
No, it's not.
That was the point I was trying to make.
I'm sorry. One last question over here.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to hear you guys' thoughts. No matter who's elected, do you guys see good things for the future of the U.S., I guess?
Yes, I do. I happen to be, and I don't want to speak for Ray, but both of us are in this business because we're optimistic. We're optimistic about the future of the country. And you still have, no matter what, the strongest, freest, bravest, richest, and what I believe is the best country in the world. And we have lots of things that need to be fixed, and there are lots of things that need to be done. And our political process, as broken as it might appear at times, is still the best way to try to get that done. And so I'm optimistic about the future.
If McCain's elected, the day after he's inaugurated, he will be my president. I love this country, and we elect people, and we can't say he's not my president because I didn't vote for him. He's the day after George Bush was elected, and I really did not want George Bush to be elected. Right down to the core of my soul, I didn't want him to be elected. But someone asked me, what about their president? I said, he's not their president, he's our president. We better learn to live with it, and we better learn to do the best we can under the circumstance. I think the system works. I love the system. It has flaws everywhere, but as Churchill said, it's the worst system other than every other system or something like that. I don't remember exact words. I'll have to memorize them. But it's a great system. It works. There are checks and balances. It balances out. I think if you have 10 years of the right wing running this country, it's terrible. And if you have 10 years of my guys running, it's probably terrible too.
Ray, Joe, thank you very much for a wonderful and insightful evening.